Oh Scheisse, the Darktide beta has arrived, as has your time to smite heretics. Now if you're new to the Tide series or a bit of a noob at Vermintide, here's some essential tips from somebody who's played many hours in this game's predecessor Vermintide, which is pretty much the same game as this, so the skills transfer over nicely. This will be my first video of many on Darktide, and I stream it over on Twitch as well, link in the description. Come with me now, lest you end up like this noob. So starting off with by far the most essential tip for a new Darktide player, never be still. Now what do I mean by this? Well, obviously you want to keep moving around when you're melee fighting, that's the obvious, right? But there's a few important habits to get into to make sure you minimize the amount of damage that you take. So there's three main things you want to be doing when engaged in a melee fight outside of just pressing WASD. The first one is dodge. You'll want to be doing this pretty much constantly when in a melee fight, to make sure that you're never in the same place for too long, giving the enemy a chance to hit you. Now, while dodge is technically unlimited, it's only really effective for the first 2 or 3 dodges. After that, as you can see here, my dodge distance is about a half or a third of what it normally is, so be sure to wait a second or two between maybe 2 or 3 dodges. Now, alongside that, you also want to push every now and again to knock your enemies off balance, but do be aware that this costs stamina. And the last thing to mix in is, of course, attacking. So overall, your movement should look something like this. A lot of lateral movement, lateral dodges, left and right, backwards occasionally when necessary, constant attacking, the occasional push thrown in. And that's it. Pretty simple, right? Here's a couple of examples. Facing a big horde here, you can see I'm constantly moving left and right, dodging very often, pushing occasionally, constantly attacking, ensuring that I'm not in the same place for too long, and thus I don't get hit very often. The way enemies attack in Darktide is that they'll run up to you and then try to hit you. So it's like 2 phases. So if they run up to you and then you're not there anymore, what do you know, they won't be able to hit you. Although some enemies have running attacks, so they might be able to get you, but for the most part, if you keep dodging around constantly, you'll be very difficult to hit. Now when it comes to dealing with a horde of enemies, here's a little illustration. Imagine that you're this green dot. This is a bird's eye view looking down, and here's a bunch of enemies coming at you. Try to imagine kind of a circle around them that you don't want to go into. You want to stay outside that circle, move laterally, as I said, left and right. Back is fine when needed, but moving left and right allows you to stay close to the action and keep your DPS up. So as you can see here, imagine this horde of enemies and they're all in a little circle and I'm just staying outside that circle. I'm not going to dive into the middle of them because then I'll get attacked from the sides and back. Just staying on the outside, constantly dodging around the edge of their circle. It's kind of like herding sheep, right? You want to get them all together, push them around so that they're in that circular shape and take control of them rather than letting them run all over you. As a side note, I'd highly recommend rebinding your dodge key to a separate key from space, which is where it is by default. Leave that as jump, and then I put dodge on my mouse, so it's very easy to press with my thumb, pretty much non-stop during combat. Now let me explain one of the hidden mechanics of Tide games, stagger. This is the reason why we want to push every so often, because the enemy will go off balance, like so. He kind of stumbles backwards, off balance for a second, and in this time he cannot attack you because he's stumbling backwards. And if Darktide is anything like Vermintide, enemies will take extra damage when in a staggered state. There's a lot more depth and strategy you can go into with that, but we'll save that for another video. For now though, just understand that's why we're pushing, just to throw enemies off balance for a second, which can protect you and your allies, and to maybe make enemies take a little more damage. And the last piece of advice I'll give you for movement is one of the most important ones. Remember and heed these words. Hello. There is always something behind you. So be sure to turn around often, no matter how safe you think it might feel, no matter if you've just come from that area, no matter if you've got allies back there, these little heretical bastards will sneak up on you, so play like there's something behind you all of the time. Moving on to the next piece of advice I'll give you, know your role. Now, while it might seem like Darktide is a mindless hack and slasher where you just mash buttons until everything is dead, it's actually quite a deep game with a lot of number crunching when it comes to hidden mechanics and builds. And as such, your character will be tailored to fit some of these roles, which will be determined by your class, weapons, skills, feats, and your general choice of playstyle. Now, while it feels like some newer roles may develop from Darktide, these are the Vermintide roles, which mostly translate. They are the crowd controller, the elite or armor killer, the special killer, the boss killer, and the support role. Your character will likely be filling 2 or 3 of these roles for the most part, most of the time, but you could potentially specialize in just one. Of course, you can still do everything. If you're pure crowd controller, you can still kill specials. You're just not going to do it as effectively as someone who's specialized as a special killer. So what exactly are these roles in a bit more depth? Well, if you're the crowd controller, it's all about knocking enemies around so that they stay off balance and staggered, so that they cannot attack your friendlies or you, and they take more damage in this staggered state. So it's all about being able to knock enemies around. The Ogren is a great class for this, of course, with his big hulking strength. But these roles are something that's heavily decided by your weapon. Now, with a big old pipe swinging left to right horizontally, that makes a good crowd control weapon, whereas an axe, which stops on pretty much one target, does great single target damage, but isn't good for hitting multiple targets. So not a good crowd control weapon. And that's all to do with another hidden mechanic called cleave, which I will cover in another video. And it's the same idea with ranged weapons like a las gun, which fires one shot at a time and only hits one target at a time. It's not so good for crowd control. A shotgun, however, which can hit multiple targets, might be a better choice if you want to go for crowd control. And as I say, it's the same idea with the class that you choose. They may have abilities that are well suited for crowd control, or maybe not well suited for crowd control. Overall, pay attention to whether your weapon, class, and feats line up with a certain type of role. Now, what does the elite or armor killing role do? Well, the elite enemies are of course the ones that are tougher than the regular trash mob enemies. This includes all the different types of scab units like scab gunner, scab shotgunner, scab mauler, and all the various kinds of ogren, many of which are heavily armored, so that's where the armor killing power comes in, because some weapons don't do much damage against armor and some weapons do. An axe, for example, is good against armor, whereas a sword might not be so good with its constant slashing. Unless it has a more stabbing thrusting attack, that might be armor piercing. Otherwise, if using a weapon that isn't armor piercing, you will have to use a lot of heavy attacks to be able to penetrate the big armor. So if you're looking to fill the elite / armor killing role, you will want to bring weapons, skills and abilities, classes, whatever, that can do good single target damage, so that you can kill these enemies as quickly as possible. Of course, anybody can kill them in any role, it's just that somebody with this designated role who tries to build for this role will be much better at killing them faster. And it's kind of the same idea in the special killer role, except you'll need to be a bit more of a hunter, seeking out the specials and trying to take them out before they do any damage to your team. Specials include things like the Poxhound, the Mutant, the Tox Flamer, these enemies that can do a lot of damage to your team if left unchecked, or that can permanently pin you or your teammates until somebody saves them, like so. Again, strong single target damage is going to help here, although armor piercing won't be so necessary as a lot of them are unarmored, and being a special killer is more of a ranged class or weapons job, so you can kill the special before it does anything. And as a side note, it's also good to try and learn the timing of dodging the enemies that can pin you, like the Mutant, the Poxhound, the Trapper. But the ideal performance for this role is to kill the specials before they reach or do any damage to your team. And then we have the boss killer role, which is fairly self-explanatory. Those that are good at doing damage to bosses. I think as a class, the Psyker seems to be good at this role, for example. And it's kind of like the classes and feats that you choose, the skills and stuff that you choose, are more essential for turning you into a boss killer than your weapons are, although there may be some weapons that are more suited to boss killing. In Vermintide, some classes are absolute murderers of bosses and really trivialize them. I kind of hope that's not the case in Darktide anymore, but I'm pretty sure the role is still there to do more damage to bosses than some. And lastly, the support role, which is all about providing buffs to you and your team. That could be damage reduction for your teammates, that could be extra healing for your teammates, or maybe a damage boost or a speed boost. Various ways you can buff up the team. I don't have any great examples of this, but I'm sure this role is still in there. I'm not sure which class fills it, but it is something that's more determined by class and feats rather than weapons. So when choosing your class, weapons, or abilities, consider which role you'd like to fill. Do you like protecting others? Or maybe your aim just isn't that good? Well, maybe you should focus on crowd control. Or maybe you do have good aim and you like sniping things down as fast as possible. Then maybe Special Killer is for you. Or perhaps you enjoy felling the biggest, baddest enemies with ease, in which case you should go for Boss Killer. As I say though, you will likely be taking 2 or 3 of these roles, so don't feel you have to pigeonhole yourself into one. That's part of the deeper fun of Darktide, creating a build and then figuring out the playstyle to best utilize it, so that you can be effective at whatever roles you choose to fill. And going even deeper into the strategy of Darktide, you'll want to think about your team composition. Which roles have been filled and which ones haven't? Is there a big hole in your team? This doesn't matter so much on the lower difficulties, but on the higher difficulties, although I haven't played them, I will imagine that it matters, just like in Vermintide. Imagine you bring a team of 4 elites, all with lasguns and axes. They're going to have great special killing power in the lasguns and great elite killing power in the axes, but very little in the way of crowd control. Or if you bring 4 ogrens that have all short-range weapons. You're going to struggle when you're all being shot to death by the distant enemies with long-range lasguns. So hopefully you understand that rolls are pretty important in Darktide, so consider that when building your character. Have a think about it. And my last piece of advice for all you Darktide recruits is to understand that awareness? That's a word, is it? Why are you making up words? And my last piece of advice for all you Darktide recruits is that awareness is key. Now I know this sounds like common sense because, well, it is, and it's true of any kind of shooter game, but there's a few little things to be aware of with Darktide. Number one, be aware of your positioning to your team. Are you by yourself like I am here? If you are, you need to be extra specially aware of specials that might grab you and pin you because it might take your allies a while to save you. Generally, you should be sticking with your team. It is a co-op game after all. Work together, stick together. That's the best way for success. Be aware of the enemies that are coming at you. If it's heavily armored, you're going to need that armor-piercing damage from somewhere. And most of all, listen out for the audio cues that the game provides. For hordes, for bosses, and most notably, specials. Here's a few examples. Listen closely. Which special do you think this is? That classic horror wolf howl can only mean a poxhound is a-comin'. And with me currently being by myself, I quickly rush back to my team just in case it comes after me and pins me down. What about this one? Listen up. I can hear that ticking time bomb above me somewhere, so I quickly fall back to get away from it, and then keep my eyes on where I can hear it, and what do you know, there it appears, and we can take it out before it really does any damage. And one more example. Those big boy screams can only mean one thing, and that is, of course, mutant. So most specials will give off an audio cue to let you know that they're coming. Some things will give visual cues, like the Scab Sniper. It gives that little laser sight that'll follow you around. That obviously means you're about to get shot in the face. So you probably need to go and do something about it, or if you can't do something about it, mark it up so somebody else can do something about it. But it's good to always mark enemies up anyway, so that everyone can be aware of where they are. Sometimes, though, we all get caught by various means, and that's fine. Just be sure to stay near your teammates, and if somebody does get incapacitated, particularly if somebody's downed on the floor, it should be a team effort as quickly as possible to get them up. It's really easy to revive someone if somebody's doing the reviving and somebody's pushing all the enemies away, but it's very difficult to do alone if the enemies are hitting you or the person on the floor. It can make it damn near impossible to revive somebody, so if somebody goes down, have the awareness to quickly rush over and try to help them up, all together as a team. That being said, sometimes you do kind of have to let people go. If it's too difficult to revive them, if they're surrounded by 19 Ogrons, you're probably just going to have to let them die and try to revive them later. Focus on keeping yourself alive and keeping the run going. Do be aware of the power of medkits as well, and keep an eye on your teammates' health. If everyone's looking low, even if you're not, it can be good to use up that health kit to get your team back in good shape. Also be aware of when your teammates are completing objectives, maybe messing with computers or carrying something, they're going to need your protection. And be aware of no return drops. This is parts in certain maps where once you drop down, you cannot get back up. So if 3 people drop down and one person gets grabbed by a poxhound and they can't see them, they won't be able to save them. So if you're not the last man down one of these no return drops, stop at it, wait at it, make sure everyone else gets down and drop down last at the same time. This will avoid any unnecessary deaths by somebody simply falling behind a little bit. Look out for your teammates because their survival and success is your survival and success. And with that, I do conclude this here video. There's a lot more to go into with Darktide. As I say, I'll be doing lots more videos. Do consider following this channel if you're interested. And as I mentioned, I'll be playing a lot of this on Twitch. So if you want to come bonk some heretics on the head alongside me, do check out the link below. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.